Welcome to the Potential Leader Lab. I'm your host, Perry Maughmer, and today we're going to talk about the quote, above all, do not lie to yourself. So it comes from a larger quote, which I'll give you right now from Fyodor Dostoevsky from his novel, The Brothers Karamazov. And the whole quote is, above all, do not lie to yourself. A man who lies to himself and believes his own lies becomes unable to recognize truth, either in himself or in anyone else, and he ends up losing respect for himself and for others. When he has no respect for anyone, he can no longer love, and in him he yields to his impulses, indulges in the lowest form of pleasure, and behaves in the end like an animal in satisfying his vices. And it all comes from lying to others and to yourself. So one of the things that I'm, fond of saying when I work with folks is, the number one priority is that we have a profound relationship with reality. And that kind of ties back into not lying to ourselves. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to achieve anything. We put these things in front of us and then we create these kind of elaborate stories to get out of having to do them. And we lie to ourselves about why we do things, why we didn't do things. And the fundamental question we have to answer for ourselves and in organizations and families is really answering one question. What do I want most versus what do I want now? And it's a really important question because oftentimes it's challenging to make the decision that supports what we want most versus what we want now, right? And we sometimes give up that choice. And that's a challenge because we have to maintain that power of choice because that's how we define ourselves in the world. It is only about what we do, not about what we intend to do. So we have to never relinquish the power to choose our actions because if we relinquish that power, we're lost. And we can't lie to ourselves about what we can and can't do or somebody stopping us from doing it or make up some story in our head about other people preventing us from achieving something that we've stated is really very important to us and something we want most. Actually, I've heard research, it's a while back, that the space between effort and reward is a sign of maturity, right? If we can stretch out delayed gratification, if we're able to put work in for something we're not going to get the return on for 6 months or a year, can we stick with it? Can we play that long game? And this goes back to, I think it was around 1970, 1971, and Stanford did this test called the Marshmallow test, which I'm sure everybody's seen the video and heard about. Now later on, I'll tell you, it's been statistically invalidated. They cannot replicate the results. And there are some things in there about socioeconomic status, which kind of delayed things and kind of screwed things up. But the reality is this, they tested 600 children in the following way. They put them in a room and they put a marshmallow in front of them. And they told the kids, and I think the kids were, 4, 5, 6 years old. They said, look, we have to run out for a second. If you don't eat that marshmallow, when I come back, you get 2 marshmallows, right? So delayed gratification. Now, if you want to see something fun to watch, just Google marshmallow test 1970s. It's hilarious to watch the way that the kids try to occupy themselves and not eat the marshmallow, right? They're pushing on it, they're squishing it, they're pushing it aside, they're looking different directions. I mean, they're trying everything. Now, some of the kids just pop it in their mouth, they're done. They're like, okay, I'm out. I'd rather have 1 than wait on 2. But of the 600 children who participated, 67% failed. They failed to last, I don't think it was very long. I think it was like a couple minutes that they would come back in. Now, what's interesting about that is then they followed all of those kids. It was a longitudinal study. And theoretically, the results were the kids that were able to delay gratification ended up doing better on SATs and, blah, 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 successful in life. Now, they have replicated some of that with newer experiments. They just can't replicate the exact same score. And I'm not saying this is an end-all, be-all. I'm just saying it is an example of how what we want most versus what we want now is a struggle for all of us. And the easiest place to see it, quite candidly, is just our diet, right? I mean, nobody would tell us that what they want most is to be morbidly obese or out of shape, right? Yet we succumb to what we want now, which is maybe a donut or a beer or, a second helping of whatever wonderful thing we're eating. I mean, if you just think about it at that level, we face that struggle multiple times every day. Do I eat this? Do I drink that? Or is that getting me? And essentially, you're answering the question for yourself: is this behavior, is the decision I'm getting prepared to make, moving me closer to or further away the thing that I want most? And if the thing that I want most is to be the healthiest version of myself, then I would make probably very different decisions during the course of a day. Now, take that same example and apply it across your life with all the things you say you want most, with all of the goals that you've set for yourself. And think about, are all of the decisions I'm making every day moving me closer to those things or further away from those things? Because what we experience today is actually the echo of our past actions. So whatever today we have was determined days, weeks, months, years ago. The things that we decided 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, 12 months ago, we're living with today. So here's the kicker. If we want a different future, then we have to do something different today to generate a different future later. But that means we have to make a different decision today and tomorrow and the next day and the next week and the next month if we want to see those things pay fruit and bear fruit later. And here's the challenge. The challenge is that bad decisions, the echo comes back much quicker, right? Because if I go out and have too many beers or too many old fashions, that echo comes back really quickly. Like I'll know pretty quickly that was a bad decision. But good decisions that move us substantially towards the things we want most take much longer to echo back to us. If we make a good decision on what to eat today and tomorrow and next week and next month, we may not see any measurable difference right away. And that's what's challenging for us, because making a material impact on the things that we want most oftentimes isn't readily viewable to us in the moment, even within 24, 48 hours, or maybe even a couple weeks. I mean, if we're saving for retirement, I mean, think about it. If you set up a 401k and you want to put 3, 4, 5% of your income in there, and you have a goal that you want to reach, even the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years, it's not, you don't look at that account and go, oh, I did it. You look at that account and go, that's it? Like that's all that's in there now? And so you have to stay the course. There's this great book. I just love the title. It's actually, I forget who wrote it, but it's called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And it's a religious book, right? It's about faith, and I think maybe a Catholic monk wrote it. But I love the idea of the saying, if we establish a long obedience in the same direction, and we just stay with it, and we don't lie to ourselves, because that's the most destructive thing we can do, is create a story in our head about why we can't do something, about how somebody else's actions stopped us from doing something. I mean, let's take another example, something that I work with people all the time. Let's take about your own development, your own personal / professional development. And let's say you want to become better at leading, the act of making the world a better place for those you care deeply about. Do we understand that leading is an activity? It's a verb, never a job, a title, a role that you occupy. And you always frame it as something you do, not something you are, because you can evolve and get better at it. And why? Who do you want to do it for, and why do you want to do it? Do you establish those things? Do you have clarity around who you're doing it for? Because my experience is, if we set out for these kind of big, challenging goals that we want to accomplish, and we only want them for ourselves, oftentimes that's not enough juice, not enough energy. But if we want them for somebody else in our life that we care about, if it's gonna help other people, and there's actually some folks nowadays that have that research that says it has to fulfill both. Like it has to be almost something that moves us forward, that gives us some kind of dividend, some kind of return on the investment. But then if you want to kind of amp up the energy around it and the commitment, if it's for the greater good, if it's impacting the greater good for other people and we get something out of it, it's like a no-brainer at that point. We're going to do it, right? And think about how much are you willing to invest? How much of your time do you spend on your own development? I work with a lot of people, and they all say they want to get better, right? They all say they show up. They pay money to do things. But how much time are they actually working on their own development? And this isn't just getting at bats, let's call it that. This is about focused feedback and reflection, and about doing things differently, not more, or working harder at it. I mean, is it on your calendar? Is it reflected in your, I use an old term, or is it reflected in your checkbook? No, nobody has a checkbook anymore, I don't think, but some people will know what I'm talking about. And so if you want to know what's important to you, just look at those two things. Look at your bank account, look at your calendar. Those are your two biggest resources, time and money. Where are you spending them? And wherever you're spending them, that's what's important to you. See, this is where we go, above all, don't lie to yourself. Because if we have this story about how things are important to us, but then we look at our calendar and we don't see anything that mirrors that commitment on the calendar, and we look at our bank account and we see all the spending we're doing, and we don't see any of those resources going towards the thing that we say we care most about that will be meaningful for us. If there's nothing on the calendar, nothing in our bank account that substantiates that, then how important is it? Really? If it's not reflected in either one of those areas, if I haven't spent any of my time, I haven't set aside any of my time for it, and I haven't set aside a budget for it, how important is it? And are we lying to ourselves? By just continuing to say, yeah, it's important. It could be family. It could be development. It could be our health. It could be any number of things that we say those are things that are very important to us. And this all comes down to, commitment versus interest. Because when we're interested in doing something, we do it when it's convenient. When we're committed to doing it, we take no excuses, only results if we're committed. But sometimes, again, do we lie to ourselves? Do we say we're committed when we're truly only interested? Because when things get challenging, do we plow through? And if we think about Mark Murphy's book called Hard Goals, his acronym, I like his acronym Hard Goals better than Smart Goals. Hard stands for heartfelt, animated, required, and difficult. Now, I like that order because I think the first hurdle that you come to with heartfelt is dramatically important. And these are the three statements that he puts forth and says, okay, score these and see how high you rank. Number one, something inside of me keeps pushing me to achieve this goal even when things get in the way. That's number one. Number two, when I think about this goal, I feel very strong emotions. That's number two. Number three, I mentally own this goal. It doesn't belong to anybody else other than me. And even if somebody else initially gave me the idea, it's 100% mine now. I own it heart and soul. If you score those things really high, the likelihood of you doing that and achieving that objective, that goal, is probably pretty high. Because if those three things exist, if I own that goal and something inside of me keeps pushing even when things get in the way, and if I feel a strong emotional pull when I talk about it, then the likelihood of me achieving it's probably pretty good. Now, the ARD part of hard is animated, required, and difficult. And you do the same thing. There are questions for each of those things. And you think about, okay, if all of those things line up and it's heartfelt, it's animated, which means I have a clear vision of what it looks like. It's required. I have to do it. And it's difficult, because difficult's important, because we do things that stretch us. And we go back to the concept of flow. You want to be somewhere just north of maybe 5 to 10% above your capacity when you're doing something new. And that is actually stimulating and drives you to do it. Because if it's too easy, if it doesn't task you, if it doesn't put you in a state of what I'll call positive stress, then you're probably not going to do it. And if it's far exceeds your capacity, you're going to become frustrated and not do it. So there is a sweet spot there of difficulty. But if it's able to score high on heartfelt, animated, required, and difficult, then there's less friction for me to get the thing done. It's pulling me with it. I don't have to push myself. If I score low on those things, then I've got to create a bunch of internal effort to get it done. And not that I can't do it. It's just going to be far harder than it should be, and it might take me longer. And quite honestly, it might just fall to the bottom of the list sometimes when I'm looking at my to-do list, because there's nothing that I look at and go, I can't wait to do this. And again, are we making decisions every day that move us closer to or further away from our goal? And then when we talk about lying to ourselves, I shared with you about Dostoevsky. Here's what Nietzsche said. Friedrich Nietzsche said, the strength of a person's spirit would then be measured by how much truth he could tolerate. Or more precisely, now think about this, more precisely, to what extent he needs to have it diluted, disguised, sweetened, muted, or falsified. The strength of a person's spirit would be measured by how much truth he could tolerate. About ourselves, not about other people. We always make this about other people. The best thing to do is make it about ourselves. How much truth about ourselves can we tolerate? About our own behaviors. When somebody asks you about a goal or about something that you're going after, can you honestly say, yeah, I take complete responsibility for that. I've just decided not to do it. I'm lazy. Other things got in the way. I chose other paths that were far easier, and this one I just haven't gotten around to yet. Or do we construct an elaborate story in our head about the people and the things that got in the way to justify the way we're feeling? I have a close friend of mine who says when you play the rationalization game, you always win. Because believe me, we can rationalize the hell out of anything. We can make up some stories now. We all know that. And herein lies the rub. At the base level, our brain is working against us in this whole effort. All right? Just remember, don't believe everything you think. And we're going to talk a little bit now about how the brain works. Because the brain is wired, initially, the brain is wired for one thing as its, I'll use a term from Star Trek, its prime directive. The prime directive of our brain evolutionarily is to keep us alive. It's survival. And that function trumps every other ability that the brain might possess. Number one thing, are we safe? It's going to keep us safe. Now, what's funny about that is all the stuff we're talking about, your goals, your personal development, your professional development, your growth as a human, none of that's safe. Those things are risky to do. And they create risk in our brain, so our brain's actually fighting us. It's going to give us every reason that we can possibly think of to not do those things. So it's between you and your brain, it ain't supporting you. It's not helping you in this effort. Now, since it is focused on survival, the next thing is it's going to conserve energy because it wants you to have plenty of energy in case things go south and you have to, fight, flight, or freeze, right? So it's conserving energy and keeping you safe because you want to have energy in reserve. So again, when you're expending large amounts of energy, your brain's putting a governor on that. It's like, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that. Like, let's not push ourselves too hard. And the primary way that our brain conserves energy is basically, if you want to call it, our cognitive biases. There's about 180 of them that have been identified. The patterns, the shortcuts that our brain uses to make decisions. And then what happens is these patterns become habits because we do them over and over again. And to be honest, your brain doesn't distinguish between a good and a bad habit. All of us can attest to that, right? If we've ever done anything that isn't good for us, if we smoke or drink or eat or, do those things and we have a habit of doing something, like if we have a habit that when we get stressed, we eat. Or we have a tough day at work, so we go home and have a glass of wine or an old fashioned. That's a habit. Our brain doesn't tell us it's a bad habit. It's just a habit. So you got to think about this. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, Our brains are actually, they refer to it as cognitive misers, right? That was a saying or a term coined by Suzanne Fiske and Shelley Taylor in 1984. And it describes the ability and tendency of the brain to problem solve in the most simple and straightforward ways rather than utilizing more sophisticated and effort-intensive ways. And by doing this, again, the brain conserves energy. So it's kind of like Occam's razor, right? It's like saying, okay, if there's 3 solutions, the easiest one's the best. That's the way our brain defaults to. So our brain is looking for the simplest, easiest answer and not the one that truly helps us solve the problem in front of us. Again, it's looking for a shortcut. Conserving energy, keep us safe. See, it all connects. Shortcuts to thinking, conserve energy. We need energy to run because we might have to flee in order to stay safe, or we might have to fight. So again, it all ties back to your brain's wired to keep you safe. That's it. That's its prime directive. So we have a general inability, by the way, to even be alone with our thoughts. We don't like to sit quietly with ourselves. And I'll tell you how much we don't like it. They did a study, the authors, they were based at Harvard out of University of Virginia. And what they did is they put people in a room for 6 to 15 minutes and asked them to do nothing. Just sit in the room for 6 to 15 minutes. No phone, no computer, no task, no puzzle, no paper, no book. Just sit. Sit quietly with yourself. And they ask them afterwards if they, how people liked it. And by and large, they said, well, they didn't like it at all. And it's funny, they actually said they had a hard time focusing. Like they're sitting in a room by yourself, and generally people said we had a hard time focusing. Now, and this is just, I guess, funny. They actually put a machine in there where somebody could shock themselves by pushing a button. So they're sitting by themselves and they're like, hey, I guess if you get bored, you can push that button and shock yourself. Now, they gave them 15 minutes, and here's what happened. 2/3 of the males ended up giving themselves shocks to avoid being alone with their thoughts. Now that's after they removed some of the data, because one guy actually shocked himself 190 times in 15 minutes. And then 1/4 of the women also gave themselves a little jolt. So just think about that. I mean, and I'll have to go back. What was it? 2/3 of the men and 1/3 and 1/4 of the women. 2/3 of the men, 1/4 of the women, each preferred to shock themselves than to just sit quietly with their own thoughts. And the authors said the following: being alone with their own thoughts for 15 minutes was apparently so aversive that it drove many participants to self-administer an electric shock that they had earlier said they would pay to avoid. So before this started, people said, I'd pay not to get shocked. And then they left them alone for 15 minutes and they're pushing the button. The brain is a difficult thing to control, and most of the time we just rather avoid the trouble of trying. So we just let it run wild. And it is not making decisions based on our best interest and coming to terms with what we want most. It is very much about what we want now. Your brain is not wired to help you achieve what you want most. And then beyond what the author said, the results indicate that although we complain that we're persecuted by things like smartphones and emails, we actually relish the distraction. We like the distraction. We talk about how we're inundated with emails and phone calls and texts and all those things, but the reality is we like it. Because here's the thing, if we didn't like it, we turn it off. I mean, we turn off notifications on our phone if we didn't like the interruption. But most people don't. The phone's pinging all the time. How many people feel their phone buzz in their pockets when it's not in their pockets? How many people have felt that and said, "Oh, my phone. Oh, wait a minute, my phone's over there. Why is my pocket buzzing?" And for me, this whole brings up a quote from Blaise Pascal, who said, "All human evil comes from a single cause, man's inability to sit still in a room." All human evil comes from a single cause, man's inability to sit still in a room. Above all, don't lie to yourself. It's tough, but if it was easy, everybody'd do it, right? So what do we do now? Oh, I don't know. Here's some things. Here's some ideas. Here's some thoughts. Remember that whatever you pay attention to affects your life. Whatever your attention goes to is how you're going to live your life. Whatever you pay, the term pay attention, there is a cost associated with it. So whatever you pay attention to is going to impact your life. The other thing is, don't boil the ocean. We can do nearly anything, but we certainly, most certainly, 100% can't do everything. But we have a tendency to think we're going to do it all, right? And I think part of that is we just want to be busy, right? We think that we have this kind of achievement culture, this grind culture where we have to keep pushing and pushing and do more and do more. And there's a great quote, and I forget who said it, that my goal is not to get more done, it's to have less to do. But we have to be able to sit quietly with our own thoughts and figure out what is important, right? What is meaningful? What do I want most? That's what we have to figure out. And what's the priority, which until the 1950s was not ever plural, priorities, because by definition, a priority cannot be plural because it is the one thing. And so what more than anything matters to you? Even if there are a couple of them. And do those things stay at the top of your list? Is that the frame through which you look at the world? And do you end up saying no to many things so that these things stay at the top? Because if you're saying yes to things, you are saying no to other things. Because the more you say yes to, the less you're actually going to get done. Very successful people and organizations say no far more than they say yes because they don't lie to themselves. They know they have constraints, and they're actually liberating constraints. That's what constraints do. They liberate you because if you know you have a limited amount of resources, you'll be very selective as to where you put those resources because you can't do everything. And if you have one or two things that are ultimately the most important thing for you, you're going to figure out how to say no to a ton of things. The third thing is, don't believe everything you think. Learn about the cognitive biases. Now, you need biases so you can exist. So you're not going to nobody can walk around with absolutely no bias whatsoever. Here's the goal. Constantly, consistently update your biases. Be aware of them and continue to update them. Learn new things so that you can update your biases. It doesn't mean you won't operate with them because you're going to need them to survive. Everything can't be a novel issue that you have to solve every day. So you are going to use shortcuts. Just make sure you can discern when to use them and when not to use them. You shouldn't use them on everything all of the time. Some things are going to take long and they're going to be hard to figure out. And there's no shortcut, there's no hack, there's no way around it. The next thing is challenge your inner critic. We all have them. And my way of doing that and my recommendation would be keep a journal. Because sometimes, I'll just say, getting your crazy out on paper helps you deal with it. Because I don't know if you've had this experience, I sure have, where I'm having these thoughts and I think I'm thinking, like I'm going through this and that and consider it. And I think it's rational. It sounds rational in my head as it's banging around in there. And then the minute I share it with somebody or write it down, suddenly I think to myself, well, that makes no sense whatsoever. Like, why the hell would I think that? When you say it out loud, it sounds different. When you write it down and see it outside of your head, it looks different. So keep a journal. When you get into a sticky situation, write down your thoughts, make sense of them. The two last things, one is focus on other people. C.S. Lewis said, humility is don't think less of yourself, but think of yourself less. And oftentimes, if we focus on other people, what we're doing to help other people, it changes our behavior. Brain imaging research has actually revealed that compassionate acts, like giving money to charity, activates the brain pleasure centers in the same way as eating sugar. Right? So doing something for other people actually is uplifting for us. And then finally, the easiest, well, I won't say the easiest, the most satisfying, the most meaningful, I think, not easiest, is just be grateful. Think about what you have, not what you don't have. Money and success can bring you a temporary boost to your spirits, but the only way to achieve lasting happiness is develop an attitude where you're focused on compassion for yourself and others. Just be grateful. Think of everything you have. And then think of the things that you want most versus what you want now. Here's the formula I use. I try to make that decision just 50% of the time or better every day. I think success is just being able to ask yourself that question when you're faced with the decision. When somebody says, do you want to go to happy hour? Ask yourself, is this action getting me closer to or further away the thing I want most? Here's the wonderful thing about it. There's no bad answer. There's no wrong answer. Just own it. Like own that decision and keep your power intact. You can make whatever decision you want. Nobody's judging you. Nobody should judge you. As long as you own the decision. As long as you maintain the power of making the decision and you act in good faith to yourself. Just never act in bad faith, as Sartre would say, which is pretending that you don't have the option. Because actually life is just about where you understand that you always have a choice, even if it's not the choice you want. You always have a choice. So I hope this hit home. I hope it resonated. I hope some bit of it was useful. I will tell you that most of the time, to be honest with you, I'm just talking about the things that help me. I'm talking about the things that I struggle with, the things that I see myself. And I hope that sometimes when I share them, other people think to themselves, yeah, that might be something I want to think about too. So I hope there's something helpful here. And take care of yourself and take care of each other. Offer each other and yourself. Start with yourself. Offer yourself some grace and have some humility. And then offer grace to some other people too, because we need it. All right. I'll see you back in the lab soon.